You on the list now? Great. All right, let's call up our first presenter.
First presenter is Kevin Walby. If you can come forward and read your name into the record.
Good afternoon. State your name and your address for the record, please.
Kevin Walby, Associate Professor. I've studied policing for 20 years. I've published over 100 peer-reviewed articles on policing and presented at 200 conferences. With my comments, I will articulate four grounds.
Can you provide your address, sir?
My address?
Yes, sir.
Home address?
We need an address for the record. We're okay with that? Okay, that's fine.
On the live stream? Does that address go
That's ridiculous.
It's a requirement that we ask of at every policy.
Can we announce our address on a live
At
stream?
every standing policy. You can give your business address.
Anyway,
we always ask you to indicate
that's
where
fine,
you live.
but can I get my extra minute back?
Yeah, that's fine. We'll give you your extra minute back. I just want to make very clear for people in the gallery. There's a process involved at City Council. We're trying to follow that process. We're not making up rules as we go along. There is a process that people identify themselves and they state their address. If you don't want to state your actual address, if you want to put your business address, go ahead. If you want to say you're from Winnipeg, that's fine, but you have to identify yourself for the record. Yes, it goes on live streaming as everything else does. And during the presentations, we would ask politely that the remarks just remain at the table, because if somebody speaks from the gallery, it's not on record, then we have to bring that person up, and it will make this very long. So if we could just do it that way, we'll get through this in good time, and people will get their time. And you're going to be back to 10 minutes.
You have my address now?
We're good.
Okay. With my comments, I will articulate four grounds for reducing police funding here in Winnipeg and in all other Canadian cities. The first ground to make a claim for police reduction is the issue of budgets. This is a position that will appeal mostly to those interested in municipal and provincial politics. In municipalities across Canada, police budgets now account for 30% of the municipal budget, and police budgets continue to grow. A decade from now, the police budget will be 35 to 40% of the City of Winnipeg budget. In 25 years, we might arrive at a point when 50% of the municipal budget is dedicated to policing. Policing consumes an irrational amount of resources in our city, and these costs of public policing are not sustainable. The funds also tend to vanish. Police budgets do not create value like investments in social development and community development, food security, and housing. I would argue that police brinkmanship has created structural deficits in municipalities across North America. Municipal budgets are strained by police budgets, and they will be pushed to a breaking point in the next half-century if those figures are not reduced. I'm leveraging the fact that police budgets are pushing cities to bankruptcy, suggesting this fiscal drain is a problem for provincial municipal politics. The second ground upon which to make claims for police reduction is to learn from social movements that make claims for this very thing, a reduction in policing. These groups are making these claims based on their experiences of police violence. The most prominent group in North America is Black Lives Matter, which has claimed public police in the United States have grown out of the institution of slavery. Black Lives Matter calls for transformative changes in criminal justice institutions. The parallel in Canada is Idle No More, which claims that public police in Canada represent a colonial state enterprise. They contend public police are a colonial entity created to occupy the lands now called Canada, indigenous territories taken through force and criminalization. There are empowerment movements such as Critical Resistance and Insight organizing in this regard. Community groups in Oakland, Chicago, Milwaukee, elsewhere are organizing for police reduction. Anti-Police Power Surrey has organized a campaign against police funding and against police interventions. Winnipeg Police Cause Harm have focused on racial profiling, police brutality, and police budgets. Such groups are generated from the experience of oppression and deprivation, and this movement is now international. Social movement groups offer their own experiential arguments for why police are unlikely to remedy conflict, more likely to enforce neo-colonial racism. The third argument for police reduction contends that police organizations have grown disproportionately to other organizations people actually depend on to survive. Police have grown disproportionate to social welfare organizations, social services, and community development. Police have also expanded disproportionately to issues they can reasonably be expected to address. I'll speak to both of these points. First, police have expanded vastly in most jurisdictions since the 1970s, and the same cannot be said for social service and community development agencies. Those latter entities have shrunk, while the footprint of policing has expanded. If we're going to live in a capitalist society, people need social services and community development. A social safety net is required for many people's survival. We've hollowed out the state, leaving mainly criminal justice agencies. Yet it cannot be said that public police are required for most people's survival. Public police do not feed people, they don't house people, they don't create families that are healthy or communities that are healthy. We've shrunk the organizations necessary for human survival while extending the organizations that do little to feed, heal, and care. The second way police have grown disproportionately in relation to social issues is that they can reasonably be expected to address. Police can only address issues where there's some transgression, where there's some evidence to be collected, there's some type of prosecution to pursue, but they cannot address social and economic sources of conflict. The only way to address these issues is through community and social development. So police are expanding disproportionate to problems they can be expected to address, and they cannot be expected to address the social and economic sources of most transgression. If we expand social and community development, it will have an impact on reducing transgression. Expanding policing operations probably will not, and as I'm going to argue next, criminological literature shows that expanding police operations may indeed have the opposite effect. The final ground to argue for police reduction is harms-based. Literature on social harm explores how institutions and social trends that are preventable and foreseeable cause harm. Social harm is not always immediately identifiable or sensational, but it is pervasive in scope and over time. Social harms are community disintegrating forces. The fourth argument here is that police reduction suggests police reduction is necessary because public police are disintegrating forces. Public police engage in sensational and horrific forms of harm, such as shootings. However, the idea here is that it's the hidden effects of criminalization over time that are more harmful and destructive. Criminalization is a kind of toxic exhaust that disintegrates whole neighborhoods of people. To explain, in his book Imprisoning Communities, Todd Clear, 2009, has argued that criminalization over time creates tremendous social harm. Criminalization does this by displacing members of communities, taking away their capacity to contribute to local economy, to family, to neighborhood associations. Criminalization not only makes it more difficult for people to find housing, employment, social services, and social networks upon release, but upon imprisonment, child participation in education goes down, families and marriages are torn apart, relations of trust and intimacy are degraded. This is all laid out very clearly in what is mainstream criminology. These effects of criminalization are concentrated in poor racialized communities, which means the negative effects of criminalization are concentrated in communities that have already suffered historical trauma from colonialism. Another study by Jonathan Mamulo likewise shows that aggressive policing tactics tend to increase crime in 5 and 10 year cycles rather than decrease crime, the exact opposite of what we are told police intervention does. Criminalization creates conditions for more harm to continue, which erodes the capacity of neighborhoods to foster healthy relationships among the persons who live there. So short term, police use harm to mitigate harm. Police use harm to create safety. But there's an unintended consequence of doing this that erodes our communities. So without hyperbole, I am saying that even mainstream criminology and public health scholarship shows that public police interventions foster conditions that cause crime if you look at the long term. In conclusion, I would note historical examples of other dominant institutions that we've had such debates about that have caused social harm and that have been scaled back, but that at the time were accepted as indispensable. Only decades ago, we locked up people in asylums who had mental health issues or did not display conformist behavior. And it was discovered through research that asylums made mental health issues worse, that asylums eroded communities, and that they amplified the harm of these interventions. A number of groups began an international movement to mobilize against asylums. Literature on social harm has advanced similar claims about cars, about cigarette smoking, about workplace deaths, and about air pollution. And I would contend that public police are a similar type of institution causing social harm that should be scaled back. Thank you.
Thank you. Just see if there's any questions from the board. No other questions? Could you just give me that book title once again? You had mentioned Imprisoning Communities, is that correct?
Todd Clear,
Todd
2009, Imprisoning Communities.
Thank you, Todd Clear.
And the Jonathan Mamulo study is in a peer-reviewed journal.
You know which one?
I can send it to the board.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. One question on your presentation, if you don't mind, for myself. I'm wondering what suggestion you would have. I understand the overall theme and presentation. What suggestion are you having that would be something you would want or desire to see in the budget based on that? Understanding that the city doesn't take care of social services, community, yes. So I'm just wanting to make sure you have an opportunity to speak to that.
Well, in looking at the budget, there were a couple things that I thought of. First is that some of the statistics around the increase in crime and increase in fear of crime are being used to advocate for additional police resources and that police will somehow decrease those numbers. But I think they better demonstrate my argument that over time, 5, 10, 15-year cycles, if we intervene more and more with criminalization, then it's likely we'll see crime rates go up. It's likely that crime rates will go up the more and more we erode communities through punitive interventions. I think that budgeting year to year is not addressing the bigger question that I'm raising about 5, 10, 15-year cycles and trying to move toward a place where we have greater amounts of municipal funding dedicated to community and social development rather than policing.
So would the social development not be a provincial or federal angle? Or?
It could be provincial, but there's lots of municipal interventions that can be done in that regard too, that are not exclusive to the federal or provincial level.
Okay. Councillor Chambers, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. What would you advocate as a responsible ratio in terms of our police service to our population?
Again, I don't know if I can tell you a magic kind of number in terms of percent of the municipal budget or police strength. I don't really speak in those kinds of terms. But I think it's worth thinking about the broader picture. I think everyone in this room would probably agree that what police do is try in the very short term to keep people safe with pretty limited tools. But there's a bigger picture here that we're not addressing when we move 1/3 of the municipal budget pie into police and other punitive interventions.